Imagine a promise so deep that death itself couldn't break it. Imagine a heart that refused to stop waiting. Long after everyone else had walked away. For 7 full years he kept that promise. 7 winters. 7 summers. Every single night on the same cold piece of earth. He never left. Not once. This is the true story of the dog who simply could not say goodbye. Until one ordinary afternoon, someone finally told him he could. And what happened next will stay with you for the rest of your life. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'm really curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach around the world. The storm came in sideways that night, wind screaming like it wanted to rip the roof off the little cedar house at the edge of the world. Elias sat alone in the yellow glow of a single lamp, staring at nothing, the way he had every night since they carried his wife out in a box. The silence was so complete he could hear his own heart forgetting how to beat. Then came the scratching. Soft. Hesitant. Almost swallowed by the rain. He opened the door expecting a raccoon or the wind playing tricks. Instead there stood a creature made of shadow and bones, black fur plastered to ribs you could count like piano keys. The dog didn't bark, didn't whine. He just looked up with eyes that had already seen too much and said, without words, "Take me or let me die here, but decide." Elias hadn't spoken in days. His voice cracked like old wood when he finally muttered, "Well, come on then." The dog stepped over the threshold as if he'd been waiting his whole life for permission. He walked straight to the fireplace, circled twice on the braided rug that still smelled faintly of her lavender soap, and dropped. Not collapsed, dropped, like a man finally laying down a burden he was never meant to carry alone. Elias stood there a long time, watching the flames lick the wet fur into steam. Something inside his chest that had turned to stone the day they closed her casket shifted, just a fraction. He didn't name the dog that night. Didn't need to. By morning the bowl was empty, the rug was warm, and the stranger had chosen his human before the human ever chose him. Later, when people asked what the dog's name was, Elias only said, "Rocco." Like it had always been Rocco. Like some things are decided long before we're brave enough to admit them. The days settled into a rhythm so perfect it felt like the world had agreed to hold still for them. Every afternoon, just as the sun began to bruise the sky purple, Elias would stand at the door and tap his pipe twice against the railing. Rocco was already there, tail sweeping slow arcs through the air, eyes shining with the quiet certainty that this walk was the only appointment either of them ever intended to keep. They took the same path every single time. Down the gravel track, past the rusted mailbox, through the gap in the salal where the trail spilled onto the beach like a secret. Elias walked slow, Rocco matched him step for step, never ahead, never behind, just close enough that their shadows touched and became one long shape stretching across the wet sand. Rocco always carried the same piece of driftwood, pale and smooth as bone, clenched gently in his jaws like it was the most precious thing ever pulled from the sea. Elias never threw it far. Just far enough for the game to matter. Rocco would bound into the surf, water exploding around him in silver sheets, then trot back and drop it at Elias's feet with the softest, proudest huff, as if to say, "See? I still remember how this works. When the light finally bled out and the gulls went quiet, they climbed the porch steps together. Elias eased into the old Adirondack chair that still held the shape of his body. Rocco circled once, twice, then lowered himself with a deep, satisfied groan and rested his big head across Elias's boot, warm and heavy as forgiveness. Elias filled his pipe with the same vanilla tobacco that used to drive his wife crazy in the sweetest way. He'd light it, draw slow, and let the smoke drift out over the darkening water. Sometimes he spoke, low and aimless, about nothing and everything, the price of salmon, the ache in his left knee, the way her laugh used to bounce off these same cedar walls. Rocco never moved. Just breathed in the smoke and the salt and the sound of Elias's voice until the stars came out one by one. Those evenings were the only hours Elias ever looked truly peaceful, and Rocco the only soul alive who knew it. Two shadows, one heartbeat, keeping watch over a world that had finally stopped asking them to be anything more than exactly what they were. Morning came soft and ordinary, the kind that tricks you into believing nothing will ever change. The kettle never whistled. The stove stayed cold. The old percolator sat silent on the burner like it already understood. When the neighbor knocked and got no answer, he let himself in the way people do in small places where doors are more suggestion than rule. He found Elias exactly where he always sat, head tilted toward the window, pipe gone cold in his hand, a faint smile caught halfway between sleep and somewhere better. He looked smaller than anyone remembered. As if the leaving had taken a little of the space he used to fill. Word moved through town the way fog moves, quiet, unstoppable. By noon the cedar house was full of hushed voices and the smell of coffee no one drank. Someone draped a quilt over Elias's shoulders even though he couldn't feel the chill anymore. Someone else closed the curtains so the sun wouldn't stare. The funeral was small the way Elias would have wanted. 11 people standing in a half-circle of drizzle, boots sinking into the grass, saying the things you say when words feel too thin for the size of the loss. The preacher's voice cracked on, dust to dust. A gull cried overhead like it had been paid to do it. They lowered the plain pine box. Handfuls of earth made soft, final sounds. And only then did someone ask the question that turned every heart cold. Where's Rocco? They looked to the porch. Empty. To the truck. Empty. To the path that led to the beach. Nothing but wind moving the salal. The big black dog who had never once missed a sunset walk, who slept across the doorway like a living threshold, who carried that same driftwood stick like a vow, was simply gone. No one saw him leave. No one heard a paw step. He had waited until the last shovelful of dirt settled over his person. Then vanished into the gray morning. The way some promises vanish into the dark. When it's finally time to keep them alone. The groundskeeper, Mr. Delgado, came at dawn to open the gates the way he had every morning for 31 years. He expected silence and wet grass. Instead he found Rocco. The big dog was lying full length on the freshest mound, chin resting on folded paws, staring at the headstone that hadn't even been carved yet. Rain had already soaked him through, black fur glistened like oil. He didn't lift his head when Delgado called. Didn't twitch when the gate clanged shut behind him. Just breathed slow and steady, as if the earth beneath him was still warm. Delgado knew whose grave it was. Everyone did. He'd been at the funeral the day before. He'd watched that same dog stand at the edge of the hole like a sentinel while strangers cried. He stepped closer, boots squelching. "Come on, boy. Let's get you home." Rocco's eyes flicked up once, yellow, ancient, unreadable, then settled back on the dirt. The message was gentle but absolute: this is home now. Delgado tried everything that first day. Coaxing. A slice of ham from his lunch. Even the leash someone brought from Elias's porch. Rocco never growled, never bared a tooth. He simply rose, walked 3 calm steps away, and lay down again on the exact same spot, as though the leash had never existed. By evening the rain came harder. Delgado draped his own jacket over the dog's shoulders. Rocco let it stay for a minute, then shrugged it off with a slow roll of his back and curled tighter against the grave. That night Delgado couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m. he drove back with a flashlight. The beam found Rocco in the same position, rain drumming on his fur, eyes open, watching the dark like he was waiting for Elias to sit up and tap his pipe twice against the headstone. Delgado took one photograph on his old flip phone. Just one. The image was blurry, lit only by the street lamp's weak halo, but it caught everything: the soaked dog, the raw earth, the impossible stillness of a heart that refused to leave. He sent it to his daughter with no caption. By morning it was everywhere. Front porches, coffee shops, the little groceries corkboard. People stood in the rain just to look. Some left flowers. Some left treats. Some only stood and cried without knowing why. The town had lost Elias once. Now it lost him again, every time it looked at the dog who still hadn't come home. Years passed the way tides do, slow, relentless, impossible to hold. Winter came first with teeth. Snow piled on Rocco's back until he looked like a living statue carved from night itself. He never shook it off. He simply let it stay, a cold blanket between him and a colder sky. When the groundskeeper shoveled the paths, he always left one narrow trail straight to the grave so Rocco could reach it without struggling. Rocco used it every dawn, every dusk, every midnight when the wind howled like something that had lost its own. Summer arrived brutal and bright. The sun turned the grass brown and the air thick as syrup. Rocco lay panting in the thin strip of shade the cedar tree offered, tongue long and dry, ribs heaving. Children brought bowls of water and set them down like offerings. He drank only enough to keep breathing, never enough to leave. People tried. God, they tried. Elias's niece once lured him halfway to her car with smoked salmon. He walked politely beside her, tail low, then at the gate he simply sat. She cried so hard she had to be driven home. A vet came with tranquilizers. Rocco vanished into the salal for 3 days and returned the moment the man left, as if he had only stepped out for a moment to let the world finish its foolishness. They built him a little cedar doghouse painted the exact shade of Elias's porch. He sniffed it once, walked inside, circled, and never entered again. The town learned the rules quickly. Leave the food in the same spot by the angel statue. Never touch him when he's facing the grave. Speak softly, if at all. They began leaving notes tucked under the water bowl. Thank you for loving him better than any of us ever did. I miss my dad too. Tell him we fixed the buoy bell like he always wanted. Kids called him the ghost dog. Old men called him saint. Women left lipstick kisses on the corners of the notes that bled in the rain. 7 winters. 7 summers. 2,555 sunsets. Rocco's muzzle went gray. His hips began to betray him. He rose slower, leaned harder into the earth when he lay down. The driftwood stick he once carried like treasure now stayed propped against the headstone, too heavy for teeth that had forgotten how to play. Yet every evening, when the light turned the color of bruised peaches, he still made the journey. Down the narrow path, across the grass, to the water's edge where the waves used to answer Elias's whistle. He would stand there a long time, staring at the horizon as if the sea might finally give his person back. Then he limped home to the grave and curled against it like a comma at the end of an unfinished sentence. Waiting. Always waiting. Because some loves don't know how to do anything else. Lily had been 15 when they buried her grandfather, 15 and furious at the universe for stealing the only adult who ever made her feel truly safe. She stood at the back of that little cluster of mourners with fists clenched so tight her nails left crescents in her palms, refusing to cry in front of anyone. When it was over she kissed the pine box once, hard, like a dare, then turned and walked away from the cemetery without looking back. She told herself she would never return to that town, never again smell salt and cedar and grief braided together. She kept the promise for years. Cities, boyfriends, jobs, apartments that never quite felt like home, anything to keep the ocean from whispering his name at night. She built a life loud enough to drown out the sound of waves and pipe smoke and the soft thud of a tail against porch boards. But some things grow inside you whether you feed them or not. Now her belly was round and heavy with a daughter she already loved too much, and the fear had teeth. Fear of labor, fear of failing, fear of becoming a mother without ever having been properly mothered herself. Fear that she would reach for her grandfather's hand one day and remember, too late, that she had left it reaching across an empty grave. So she came back. The town looked smaller, like childhood places always do. The cedar house stood empty and silvered by weather, windows blind with salt. She didn't go inside. Couldn't. Instead she drove straight to the cemetery in the late gold of afternoon, one hand cradling the weight under her ribs, the other gripping the steering wheel like it might keep her from falling apart. She parked beneath the same madrona tree that used to drop its red peeling bark on Elias's truck. The engine ticked itself quiet. For a long time she only sat, breathing the smell of warm grass and distant ocean, feeling her daughter kick against the seatbelt like she already wanted out, already wanted to meet the world that had hurt her mother so badly. Lily whispered to the dashboard, "I'm scared, Grandpa." Then, louder, as if the wind might carry it downward through 6 feet of soil and cedar roots, "I'm so scared, and I don't know how to do this without you." She opened the door and stepped out into the waiting silence, one hand on her belly, the other reaching for a grandfather who would never again reach back. She lowered herself onto the little iron bench that hadn't been there when she was 15, the metal warm from the sun, and the tears came all at once, no permission asked. "Grandpa," she said, voice cracking open like a child's again, "I'm having a little girl and I'm terrified. I don't know how to keep her safe when I still don't feel safe." I'm supposed to be the grown-up now and I'm not. I'm still the girl who needed you to carry her piggyback when her legs got tired on the beach trail. I'm still the girl who fell asleep on your chest listening to your heart count the waves. She pressed both hands to her belly as Ellie kicked hard, as if answering for him. I named her Ellie, she whispered. After you. Elias. Because I want her to have your steadiness. Your quiet. Your ridiculous stubborn love. But what if I ruin her? What if I mess this up the way everything else got messed up after you left? The sobs came in waves now, shoulders shaking, the kind of crying that starts in the bones and works its way out like a fever. She didn't hear the faint scrape of claws on stone at first. Then a shadow fell across her knees. She looked up through blurred lashes and saw him. Rocco. Older than time itself, gray muzzle almost white, eyes clouded with cataracts, hips trembling under the weight of years. He stood no more than 10 feet away, swaying like a tree that has forgotten how to fall. He had heard her voice. That voice, the little girl voice that used to sing made-up songs while riding on Elias's shoulders, the voice that called, "Grandpa, look," every time a gull stole her sandwich, the voice that once whispered, "Don't leave me," the night before he died. Rocco took one shaking step forward. Then another. Each one cost him everything, but he paid without hesitation. When he reached her, he lowered his great head with the last of his strength and laid it gently, so gently, in her lap, right over the spot where Ellie pressed her tiny foot against the world. And he sighed. Not a small sound. A long, slow, bone-deep release that carried 7 years of waiting in it. The sigh of a dog who had finally been told, after all this time, that someone had come back. His head was heavier than she remembered any living thing could be, heavy with 7 winters, 7 summers, 7,000 nights of refusing to leave. It settled across her thighs like the weight of every unsaid goodbye she had carried since she was 15. And then came the sigh. It started somewhere deeper than lungs, deeper than ribs, a sound that had been dammed up behind bone and grief and loyalty for 2,500 days. It rolled out of him slow and endless, warm against her skin, carrying the salt of every tear he had never shed. It was the sound a soul makes when it finally lays its burden down. Lily's hands moved without thought, sinking into the coarse silver fur along his neck the way she used to when she was small and he was still black and unstoppable. He leaned harder, trembling, trusting her not to let him fall. Minutes passed, or hours, time had stopped minding. Then, with effort that looked like it might split him in two, Rocco gathered his legs beneath him. He did not look back at the grave. Not once. He simply turned, slow as a ship leaving harbor, and began to walk. Each step was a question, "Can you still carry me a little farther?" Lily rose, one hand under her belly, the other reaching for him as if he might dissolve. He paused at the cemetery gate, waited for her to catch up, then placed one paw over the threshold he had not crossed since the morning they lowered Elias into the ground. She opened the passenger door of the old truck. The blanket was still there, threadbare, smelling of piped smoke and salt and home. Rocco studied the seat for a long moment, as if making sure it was real. Then he climbed in. He circled once, twice, the way he used to on the braided rug by the fireplace, and folded himself onto Elias's side with a second, smaller sigh that sounded almost like relief. Lily closed the door softly, walked around, and slid behind the wheel. The engine turned over with its familiar cough. She shifted into drive. Neither of them spoke. There was only the quiet click of Rocco's nails on the vinyl, the soft hitch of Lily's crying, and the sound of tires on gravel carrying them both, at last, away from the waiting. He slept before they reached the stop sign, head on the blanket that still carried Elias's shape, breathing slow and even for the first time in 7 years. He was going home. The cedar house welcomed them without surprise, as if it had been holding its breath since the day Elias forgot to come back inside. Lily opened the door and Rocco walked straight to the bedroom, nails clicking the familiar rhythm on the worn pine floor. He paused at the bed, sniffed the pillow that still carried the ghost of pipe smoke and salt air, then climbed up with the slow dignity of an old king reclaiming his throne. He circled once, lowered himself into the exact hollow Elias had left behind, and slept for 18 hours straight. When he woke, the pain in his hips had quieted to a dull ache, and the light through the window was soft and golden and forgiving. Summer arrived gently that year. Rocco spent it on the porch, lying in the sun like a black bear rug someone had forgotten to put away. He watched Ellie learn the world one determined crawl at a time, first the braided rug, then the threshold, then the warm boards where his tail used to thump. She pulled herself up using his fur as handholds. He never moved, only turned his head to lick her milky cheek whenever she toppled against him. Some mornings Lily found them nose to nose, Ellie drooling on his muzzle while he breathed her in like she was the first pure thing the universe had ever gotten right. The days grew shorter. The madronas turned red. The wind carried the first promise of rain. One morning the porch was quiet. Lily knew before she opened the door. Rocco lay exactly where he always lay, head on his paws, facing the path to the beach as if waiting for sunset. Only his chest no longer rose. His eyes were half open to the sky, calm, unafraid, already somewhere beyond missing anyone. She buried him herself, under the big cedar that shaded both graves now. The hole was shallow, her belly wouldn't let her dig deeper, but it was enough. She laid him on his side, curled as though asleep, Elias's old wool blanket tucked around him like a promise kept. When the stone was set, she stood back and read the words she had carved with shaking hands. Elias. Beloved grandfather. Rocco. He waited. He kept his promise. Now he's home. That night she left the bedroom window open so the salt air could drift in. And somewhere in the dark, two shadows walked the beach again, one tall and stooped, one low and black, carrying the same driftwood stick between them forever. He waited 7 years to hear someone say, "It's okay, boy. You can come home now." And when he finally did, he only needed one more summer. The screen fades to the soft glow of two names under the cedar tree, wind moving gently through the branches, waves whispering in the distance. Voice, barely above a whisper. If you are still here. If you let yourself feel every second of this story. Thank you. Rocco never got to read the thousands of letters people left at his grave. But I believe, somehow, he knows. So tell me in the comments, please. Who in your life loved you so fiercely that even death couldn't make them leave? A dog? A person? A memory that still sleeps at the foot of your heart every single night. Write their name below. Say it out loud for them one more time. And if this story touched even a corner of your soul, do one small thing for Rocco tonight. Hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that love like this actually exists. And subscribe so we can keep telling the stories that prove it. Because as long as we keep saying their names, none of them ever really leave. See you in the next one. Bring tissues.